Interesting news to mention from the mobility ecosystem in the field of personal data and data sharing. This session came together over the past few months, and I'm very glad that we're all here and that we are able to gather some interesting content to share with the community of MyData. And I would like to start with introducing Piia Karjalainen, the Secretary General of the MaaS Alliance, who will be our host for the first part of the session, and we'll give you some details of our speakers today and also of the organization. Piia, welcome.
Yes, thank you, Paul, and good afternoon, good morning, whatever time is it for you. Really nice to join and host this session together with Paul. So my name is Piia Karjalainen. I'm Secretary General of the Mobility as a Service Alliance, which is global network for mobility as a service, bringing together around 110 public and private partners who are all active in the field of mobility as a service. And since the mobility as a service already itself, it's very new and fresh, but also a very user-centric approach to way how we consume and how we produce or provide mobility. Of course, we are also looking MyData approach with a great interest, and we have also shown our support to MyData approach when we have been also communicating our position to the regulators and decision makers, especially towards the European Union. So MyData thinking and philosophy and format have our full support. Within the mobility ecosystem, lately there has been, of course, a lot of discussion around data, how we organize the data exchange, data sharing in mobility ecosystem, and the key word there is indeed trust. And although there still seem to be some issues how to create trust between the service providers and platforms, the another thing is that we have to be able to create trust for the users, that they feel comfortable and convenient when using different services. And I think indeed in that part, the MyData has lots to offer, lots to bring to simplify and organize that trust for us. So therefore, I'm really glad also personally, because mobility as a service and MyData, they are part of some topics of passion for me, to be here and spend this Friday evening to discuss this interesting crossroad or topics. So basically the goal of today's session is to show the importance of personal data sharing in the mobility market and discuss how we can realize sustainable mobility through citizen-centric design and experimentation. And I think it's very timely also to address the topic right now, because over the past few years we have indeed witnessed already a lot mobility as a service initiatives, some commercial services, but also publicly led pilots. And now, as I said, the MyData can really add on something there and help us simplify and organize it a bit better and more efficiently. And so therefore, in this session, our idea is really to inspire you, share some best practices, share knowledge and ideas, and so some ongoing projects, especially from the France and Belgium in that field. And also there will be some time for the co-creation. So we will now proceed with 5 presentations. We have great team coming from the Belgium and France, and I myself am living and working in Belgium, but currently established in Helsinki. So this will be our setting, and then also Paul will take over and take care of you for the co-creation time in the end. So if you have any questions based on the presentation, please use the chat box. We will address some of them to direct questions to the speakers, and also I hope that the speakers can maybe give some more information via chat box if there are some more detailed questions or if you want to share some additional information. But yeah, let's start with the first speaker. So I would welcome Gabriel Plassat, who will be presenting Mon Compte Mobilité project from France, which is one of the really good benchmarks for all of us. And Gabriel is currently working for the French Agency for Environment and Energy Management, and he is also the founder of the FabMob, which is association working on open source in mobility. And Gabriel's specific interest lies in using the power of digital platforms in mobility, but also he is trying to reduce the asymmetry and give some power back to the citizens. So Gabriel, now take please control of the screen, and there is some 10 to 15 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you, Piia, for this presentation. I will share my screen. Is it okay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. So I'm going to present a project which is starting in French. So it's Mon Compte Mobilité, my mobility account. It's a project led by FabMob, Capgemini Invent, with the support of different stakeholders, Ministry of Ecology, ADEME, CNIL, GART, which is representing the Public Transport Authority, Caisse des Dépôts, financial incentive at national level, and yes, and also all the different mobility stakeholders. So, as you know, the different stakeholders in the mobility have their own challenge regarding mobility. The companies, for their salaries, want to have a commuting plan and legal requirement management. They want also to develop smart mobility, soft mobility, and sustainable mobility. Mobility service providers want to export their offer and integrate their services in the mobility policy, and the local authority want to develop incentive and to develop and promote sustainable mobility. End user, they want to have transparency, clarity, and accessibility to the different service. And my mobility account aims to propose this different challenge to all the stakeholders. To start my presentation, I would like to present this existing project, which concern only ride sharing, covoiturage en français. So this service is already existing. This is the different cities and mobility authority who are already using this mobility ride-sharing certification system, and all the ride-sharing operator here also using it. And this ride-sharing system connects the ride-sharing operator, mobility authority, and tomorrow companies, and the citizen using ride-sharing service. This system, this is the global modelization of, let's say, of the system, produce a proof of ride-sharing when the people are using a ride-sharing platform. And this certification can be read by the public authority, and then the public authority can provide an incentive to the platform, and the platform will give this amount of money to the citizen. So it's a kind of link between ride-sharing operator and mobility authority, and it's a deal. Okay, I can give you an incentive because you made a ride-sharing. And when the people are using this ride-sharing platform, all the data are also shared with the public authority. Of course, it's without with anonymization, so it's privacy by design. And then the public authority can have new knowledge on its territory. This is, for example, the map around the city of Lyon. The city of Lyon is using this ride-sharing certification system, and then the city is able to see exactly where the citizens are using a ride-sharing platform. So for us, it's a kind of My Mobility account only for ride-sharing. And if you spread this model for all the mobility service, then you can imagine the project My Mobility account. So the project, the idea is to build a platform fully open source as a common goods shared with all the different stakeholders, operated by a neutral stakeholder. It won't be a private company. It will be maybe Caisse des Dépôts. And the idea is to manage identity, mobility access, personal data management, environmental footprint index, and the different certificates like the certificate I just mentioned concerning ride sharing. So this mobility account is not a MaaS platform, but it will help MaaS operator and all the mobility stakeholder and can be connected to this mobility stakeholder platform or MaaS platform. The mobility account will integrate the profile of the citizen with all this its mobility information, and also the mobility data, all the data generated by the mobility of the people. This data will be, of course, confidential, and company and local authority can ask if the citizen fulfill some rules, for example, 100 kilometers of ride sharing or bicycle per month or different rules. And the mobility account will validate and certificate that the people is eligible to this incentive, for example. So it's a neutral platform for local authority, companies, and citizens, and it will manage only the public interest of the different stakeholders. In summary, if you are a local authority, I can manage my subsidies policy. I can also create a new incentive based on the real mobility behavior. So that's very important for us. For the citizen point of view, you can learn about mobility offer available coming from the different mobility and MaaS operator. You can visualize and use the different subsidies, receive recommendation, and decide how you can manage your mobility data. For mobility service provider, you can, of course, interface the mobility account with their own platform, with a connector, a Mobility Connect. And this Mobility Connector will simplify the creation of a new account, like a Google Connect, for example. And if you are a company, then you can set up and manage the mobility policy for all your employees and create a new incentive policy based on the real mobility of your employee. For the company and the local authority, this incentive, you can create new incentive, but you won't be able to access to the real mobility data of the citizen or your employee. You only can ask their account if they are eligible to this incentive policy without have access to the data. So this project started this summer. We are in construction of the MVP. We have selected the first pilot region, and so we will start testing in March next year, and add after that 2 other regions. And it's a 3 years project. So we also want to share this project and developments with other countries in Europe, aiming to create a shared open source mobility account for all European countries, because it's a non-competitive asset. In fact, we think it's a really useful for everyone, and we don't need to recreate and maybe, of course, everyone can improve this. It will be the first development, and we want to share it and to build on this first version, let's say. I have finished. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I heard that there was also a call for collaboration, or maybe another initiatives that you can sort of like combine and scale up this approach. I also see that there is a question coming from Paul, and he's asking that, have you looked at the data trust or data commons as a model for the governance organization?
The governance organization, we will study during the project which kind of governance will be the most adapted, combining the mobility stakeholder and also the public authority, and we will look on that. Maybe it can be a public stakeholder like Caisse des Dépôts. Or maybe we will need to create a neutral stakeholder to manage this mobility account.
Okay, Paul, was that clear, the answer? Would you like to elaborate something from
yes, that is very clear, because I think that's a good question, that everybody is looking at the neutral platform of a governance institution that will manage the data trust of the commons data, which is then owned by the individual. And so I think it's good that you are looking at this research in France, and that this research can be shared with other countries as well, because we have comparable initiatives going on, which we will explain later. And so that's a very good thing, that this governance structure and also maybe public private people partnerships that are being formed are investigated, and the knowledge is shared between the parties.
And I see the 2 other questions. We plan to use also France Connect government service, which is existing. France Connect is a connector for different public services in France, and we will also integrate this authentication system. And for the ride sharing, no, it's not based on Cozy Cloud. It's a public development, a specific public development, but it's also fully open source. So if another country in Europe want to test the ride sharing certification platform, we can of course share this development with other countries.
Yes, it's very interesting, because we in Benelux have just launched a living lab for cross-border mobility between Belgium and France, and Holland and Luxembourg and Germany. And so one of the first things is cross-border identity sharing. So it would be interesting to compare notes and to see how the architecture can be, because it's about identity federation, about integrating existing government electronic IDs, and so I think that's a very interesting thing. Thanks for your feedback, Gabriel.
Okay, and I think now it's good time to move to neighboring country, to Belgium. I would like to invite Buylle, who is working as the information architect for the Flanders Information Agency. So Ralph, maybe you can take a control over the screen. Meanwhile, I will introduce you for the audience. So Ralph is currently working as an advisor for e-government strategy for the regional government administration of Flanders. And there he tries to implement a more rational and interoperable e-government framework and also promote open data, open standards and open processes. And he also leads the development of a generic data standard for government administration in Flanders called Oslo, which is stands for Open Standards for Linked Organizations, including modeling of mobility as a service. And we will also hear more about Oslo a bit later on. But now, Ralph, floor is yours. And Gabriel, there might be some other questions coming for you from the chat box. So if you don't mind, maybe you can give your written responses there.
Piia, thank you for your kind introduction. Are you able to see my screen and to hear me? All right, thank you. So I'm Raf and I'm working for Flemish government, for the Flemish Information Agency. And we're at crossroads of local government, federal government, private sector, and the citizen. And we are responsible for several billions of secure transactions within the region of Flanders. Now, before we take off, a little preamble and some context. Now, in the annual government policy statement of Flanders, the Septemberverklaring, our minister-president stated that citizens and companies must regain control over their data again. So he pointed out that our predecessors managed to build excellent utilities like sewers, gas, and electricity distribution for their time. And now it's up to us to build excellent data utilities for the digital, to support the digital transformation. And also within the speech of von der Leyen in September, we heard the question that citizens must regain control over their data again. Now, some history, I take you back to 2015, and then we kicked off the initiative of a Flemish citizen profile. Now, the aim was, and it's already in place now, to give citizens insights of all their interactions with the government and insight in the data that the governments own about them. For instance, their diplomas. So what we did back then was creating touch points both for regional websites and local websites, where regardless of the channel, a citizen can get insights of all the data that the government owns. But the aim from the start was to empower citizens to reuse their data stored within government information systems within a different context, within, for instance, private sector, reusing your diploma within when applying for a new job, or reusing your birth certificate, your domicile address, your driver's license within the context of mobility. Also, as the borders between public and private sector, even within mobility, tend to fade, reusing information such as a mobility profile, which you create outside of the government within the context of the government. Now, a good thing is that we have the GDPR, so the General Data Protection Regulation. So this means when we go back to the private sector, anyone who collects data now, today, also manages and controls our data and shares it rarely with others. This is not only bad for innovation, but also bad for transparency. Now, the data collector is the de facto, the owner and manager of our data. Now, the GDPR, our European regulation, ensures that we as a citizen have the right to request all of our data from anyone who processes our data. And this is a good thing. But the next step must be that we as a citizen can decide for our own which data we would like to share. So we need the data utilities that our Minister President pointed out to give us, again, the control to share our data. Now, in the context of the citizen profile, we thought, okay, we have GDPR, we can just put a consent module on it, but we stumbled upon some problems to share the data with other parties, because a citizen can only give consent to a party where there is a balanced relationship between the citizen and the party that will share the data. And in this case, there's no balanced relationship between the citizen and the government. So we could not put a consent module on our citizens' profile. And then we started thinking about personal data vaults and also exploring the concept of solid. Now, the idea that we explored was that users can store their own data in pods, personal online data stores, where we as a user can remain in control. Because later on I will explain that this will also solve some problems of the data sharing from public sector towards the private sector. So with Solid, you can decide for yourself how or with who you would like to share your data, and which services you will give your data to. So I compare it to a USB stick on the web, where I can decide which applications have access to which data. So it could be data, for instance, from our social network, our wearables, or our mobility profile. So I start with an example before I switch to mobility of the social media, because this is something that everybody is familiar with. So in this case, we have a social media post. I post something on social media, and within the concept of a pod, my post and my profile picture would be in my data pods, my online memory stick, and your reply and your comment would be in your pods. So this is a totally new concept when we started in 2018 with exploring it and building our first pod compliant citizens profile. It was a new concept for us because you have separation between the data and the application that reuse it. So we have a totally decentralized network where we can give, in the social media example, access to a platform or application to an application. And if we don't like it, we revoke the access and we will use another application. Now, how did Solid and this concept of personal data vaults helped us within the citizen profile? Well, in two ways. One, the data subject, me and my diploma, becomes the controller of the data. So I can, it's not the government that will share my data, but it's me as a controller that will share my data. And also Solid helps us as we call it an interoperability facilitator. It helps us to share our data with other ecosystems without the need of translating it over and over again. So here you get a glimpse of the citizen profile, me and my diploma, and the ability to connect pods. Now, where are we now? Now we have a beta system running on the fully environment of my citizen profile, where we are able to share it with another application. And this will be put in production towards the end of next year. So then data can start flowing, we will get more data and more innovation. Now, what are we doing at this moment? We are bootstrapping the ecosystem. So it's about the components of the pod, of course, about contextual integrity, giving permission, but it's also about the data as well. And therefore, we started up a standard for mobility. So since 2012, we run an interoperability program called Open Standards for Linked Organizations, Oslo. It's in co-creation with public sector, private sector, and academia that we create data standards. We don't invent our own standards, but what we do is we start with use cases within a domain, in this case, mobility or shared mobility. We draft use cases together with public and private partners. Then we start drawing a model and aligning it on the international standards. Then it's ratified within the data governance of Flanders. And in this way, we create a knowledge graph where we connect all data from the different policy domains. This means when we will start reusing this data from our pod, mobility, health, and other domains can easily be connected without the need of transforming the data over and over. Now, I would like to give an example from one of the discussions that we have right now in the different verticals, in this case, mobility. Now, I take mobility as a service as an example, which is important, of course, to reduce the ecological footprint in Flanders. Therefore, we need to link all the data on the supply and demand. And this often includes me as a traveler, my full routing, booking, and service history. Now, why? Because if we know better what the mobility profile and needs of the citizens are, we can better tailor these offers towards personalized digital mobility services. Let's take Google Maps, which we all know and a lot of us use for an example. It collects a lot of our personal data about us and our behavior, enabling them as a service provider to provide us personalized services. Now, as a commuter, I subsequently switch between different mobility platforms, and in almost all cases, I have to start from scratch because each platform has its own data about me, its own mobility profile. And this is even more challenging when for travelers with special needs. We see also these challenges within a government context. If I would like to use a shared vehicle, I always would have to pass my domicile address, my driver's license, sometimes my age, and sometimes also if I have a handicap, because then I could get a reduction. Now, with this concept of a pod, we implement European once-only principle, where I can just share the data from my pod. I can share it with existing mobility providers, but because there is more data, new stunning apps will arise, such as one that I am using at the right hand of the screen. It's iRail. It's an open source app which I use when commuting on the train. So this ecosystem can work because all relevant data is under our control. But it's not only a benefit for me as a commuter or a traveler, but also for the mobility providers, because checking whether my driver's license is valid and checking my history is often manual work. So this comes at a cost. One of the providers told us that it comes at the cost of €10 for each user. Then also you have the liability. We've seen that there have been some security breaches where certain people did joyriding with shared mobility cars. Well, if we can share an authorized, structured, certified copy of our driver's license and other data with those providers, it's even a benefit for them. I would like to conclude with some insights. Now, by putting the user in control, government as well as private partners can streamline existing mobility processes and therefore enable future-proof systems, because I pointed out, as there won't be a need to collect as much data as possible. It's about not anymore about collecting data, but about reuse of the data. Solids, the solid ecosystem was very important for us because it's like interoperability by design, as it's built upon the web and the standards we've been using for many years, browsing the World Wide Web. It's like context agnostic, and it can facilitate not only sharing documents such as PDF, but machine-readable data, which can be easily reused by the different applications. Also, it's an open ecosystem, and it fully relies on the principles of decentralization, which is, according to our government, the way to go. As it builds on standards, we've seen that the integration with our citizen profile was straightforward, and therefore we see it rather than as a process innovation than a technological innovation. And to conclude, at this moment, we are bringing all ecosystem players together, among them many public and private sector players of the mobility sector. And although we don't have an mobility profile already in our pods, we see that the readiness in public and private sector. And I hope at the next year conference, I can announce that this vision became reality. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Raf. I think we are partly staying with the same topic with next speaker. So maybe we can take some questions related to those two presentations after next speaker, who will be Pieter Colpaert. So Pieter, you can prepare your screen. So Pieter is coming from the Ghent University, similarly from Flemish region in Belgium. He's working there as the postdoc researcher, and he is building My Mobility account within Solid using linked data specifications. And Pieter already back in 2010 as a student created iRail API for planning of train trips, and the API is still something online, and today it replies with many daily requests. And then during his research as a PhD, he mainly wondered how to extend such an API beyond one agency, and what the base open data interface should be for public transit agencies. And this work resulted the linked connection specification, which is cost-efficient linked data interface for federated route planning currently. And today, Pieter is asking the same question for mobility profiles within Solid ecosystem, which shows a lot of interesting parallels. So Pieter, the floor is yours, and Raf, maybe you can answer some of the questions already in chat box in written.
I now realize that the biography I sent to you was really long. Like, thank you for reading it entirely. So indeed, I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Ghent University in Flanders, and I recently started taking on the challenge together with Paul, or mainly driven by the enthusiasm of Paul that he said, hey, we also have some problems when thinking about mobility profiles. And I'm working with Professor Ruben Verborg, who's mainly pulling the Solid initiative in Europe. So this presentation contains early ideas. They're not yet the mobility profiles implementation within Solid. To the contrary, they're just ideas. I'm looking forward to hearing about other things that will need to be fixed. But these will be the ideas that I will be working on in the next months to come. So first, a bit of context. Why should we be doing this? Well, I've mainly been working on open data sets, and from the open data set department, I've been really active in IRL, so the public transit data, to publish that, to make sure that that these data are queryable and that everyone can use that to answer route planning questions. And the big goal behind that, in order to have equal access to that public transit data, is of course to create a level playing field for mobility as a service actors. Because if they cannot equally access this transit data, there will not be a level playing field, and we'll have problems to, or every player will already have to do a start investment, a big start investment, just to be able to get hold of the data, which is silly, of course, because we want that ecosystem to focus on user experience and not on silly tasks like accessing data. And today I'm happy to take a small shortcut, but if you just go to europeandataportal.eu and we just search for transport data, we already get a lot of data. So we can already start building, start creating. Of course, in these, 308,000 data sets, it takes a little bit of time in order to really start adopting these data sets. So starting from that observation, we started creating a software development kit called Planner.js, which automates data integration. So instead of having manually the fact that you would have to go manually to a data portal and select the right data sets of interest to your use case, I wanted that to be automated by coding it up in a software development kit. Planner.js is a JavaScript route planner, which just in time discovers the right data sets to use. This one over here is coded up to detect roads and traffic incidents, but we equally have support in Planner.js for public transit data, so bus data, train data, and so on. So I would say the issue is solved. If these upcoming technologies that we are building would become adopted now, then the academic challenges have been resolved, and we finally achieved that open data takes care that there's no competition for access to public data. But then of course, as we've already seen in the earlier presentations, certainly the one by Gabriel, is that a mobility profile can contain a lot of data about to give you a personal context. And route planners also need that personal context in order to function properly, because there's always that personal aspect to route planning. So all this kind of information, I would love that if I would start using a new route planner, that immediately can have this context without me having to fill out again all this information, or without having that new application or route planner to build up the entire history together with me. So I think this is an ideal case for MyData. And I also think it's an ideal case to apply solid on top of that, because of course we envisioned this level playing field, and we want to achieve that level playing field by, instead of storing all the data at the route planners itself, we want to be able to make sure that there's no competition for access to personal data, and to make sure that this data is stored in your own data pod. Now, how can we achieve that? Well, we are currently going to start prototyping how this mobility profile would look like. So I'm a little bit behind Gabriel, who already has a fully fledged implementation there. Although I see it, and please correct me if I'm wrong after the presentation, maybe Gabriel. But I see that as a more centralized solution, where in fact, if you just control your own set of pods for that you yourself have in control, that gives more provide more choice to end users. So what protocols do I see on top of this? That is that well, from the moment that you have a service that needs to commit data towards your own storage, it would post HTTP post, of course, objects to an LDP container. So that's a linked data platform container, and this is simply the core of what Solid stands for. Like also Raf already mentioned, the USB stick for on the web. That's really what it is, or what it is in the core. So you can, if you're authorized to do so, you can write towards a certain location in a Solid pod. But we still have some problems there, because how do we build across all these different apps that are listed over here? How do we make sure that they can understand the data in the same way? And for that, of course, that's why we use Solid, and why we're deeply invested in linked data, because the ecosystem of comparing linked data models. So, for instance, over here I pasted the linked data model in the Oslo ecosystem. So that's the ecosystem of Flanders on open standards for linking organizations. But way more vocabularies exist that can be used to do parts of a mobility profile, such as the GPX ontology. So that's just GPX, but then translated to linked data. And there are also recent efforts towards creating the transmodel ontology as part of the linked data ecosystem. Then a next problem that I see, and well, I hope these semantic standards, I hope that they will boil down and make sure that by driven by use cases, that they will make clear what the most common used URIs will be in order to describe entire mobility profiles. But another problem that I see is how do you organize the data? So even if you have a file space, you still need to be able to understand, or as an application, you need to be able to understand where you can post certain information. And this is some really interesting work that just has been done in the last months even. Where there's now a specification that's being built within the Solid ecosystem called shape trees, and shape trees are a small piece of linked data that both data reusers as the data pod itself can enforce and can put on a data pod and can say, look, everything that looks like an update of your personal location, well, we put it in this folder over here. And everything that's regarding your railway subscriptions or public transit subscriptions, we put in this folder. And everything that is about your vehicles, like maybe you have an e-bike which has a GPS inside, which also posts its location somewhere. Well, we also have it over there. Or maybe you have a route planner, a bike route planner. And you don't have a smart bike or an e-bike, but you have a bike route planner that stores the place where you parked your bike, so that it also can, if another route planner then if you then use another route planner to go back home, that it can also take into account the fact that you first took a first trip. Or that your first part of your journey, you already stored your bike somewhere, so that it can take that into account. But in order to know where to store that information, you need a little bit of description of how to do that. And there's the shape trees specification, which I now find really inspirational to try to include in a mobility profile, so that one, we have the vocabularies, but two, per use case, that we also have some shape trees in which we explain, look, for that specific use case, I already had an app that already looked at this, and look, you please store it in that folder so that it can be shared among multiple applications. And a last big research challenge that I want to introduce here is data retention, because a mobility account is going to have a lot of data that's going to be added on top of it. But somehow, maybe it's not relevant to always keep the most the raw data as it is in its most form and in its biggest form. So I think the solid ecosystem will need to be extended somehow with the retention policy, and I'm not sure yet how to do that. I'm looking forward to the presentation of Olivier, because I think he has from another ecosystem, he also has more insights, I think, in how these things are handled. So I just park it here. But then next to this retention policy, I also think that we need to be able to document the search space. So, for example, if you're looking for your location data from September 2020, you would know from this folder structure that you just have to look in this file. But there's now also a hypermedia specification, the tree specification, that allows you to describe that this data is indeed located in that file. But that you can also, in that way you can also document other search indexes, such as you could have a fragmentation strategy where you fragment it on geospatial properties, or that you fragment it on time-based, or even on text-based properties. And that's what I'm looking at to create the full experience of mobility profiles. And the core of mobility profiles, so meaning just storing the base data and making sure that the base data is useful for multiple route planners. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pieter. I'm taking over from Piia, and I'm happy to see that there is a lot of technical development which will allow us from the building blocks of the web, as Raf says, to evolve in a rapid way towards an integration with the current services that we are all using in mobility. And today, also as a fourth presenter, I would like to present to you Olivier Dion, who will talk about governance in mobility. Olivier is the founder of the Mobility Alliance at a new governance, and he's also CEO of OneCube. This is a MyData operator specialized in the mobility sector. Olivier is the leader of the Mobility Hub of a New Governance, and that is an association working with MyData on governance frameworks for human-centric personal data sharing. I met Olivier a few years ago, and we've been working in mobility also, Olivier, for instance, in our Flanders co-creation framework with all of the players in the ecosystem. Olivier plays a role of defining, together with all of the stakeholders, some of the attributes around governance and around personal data sharing in our mobility. So I would happily introduce him, and please go ahead, Olivier.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Do you hear me well, and do you see my screen?
I see your screen and I hear you well.
Great. So hello, everyone. So thanks a lot for the presentation. First, so we'll talk about governance for personal data sharing. And first, a quick recap of the situation in Europe. What we've seen over the past few years about personal data sharing is that we've had 2 years ago the GDPR, and we thought that the right to portability would help us to open up the ecosystem, to make personal data flow. But it did not. Apparently, it was not enough for the ecosystem. There were some missing pieces for data to flow. Then you had some interests of the market, not only in mobility, but in other sectors also, about data sharing, but still very siloed approaches, and no real common political will. That came with the European data strategy earlier this year. Here we've got a collective shared goal of putting data sharing and personal data sharing at the center of the map. And you see the building of large-scale initiatives all over Europe on many, many verticals. But still no standards yet. Still we see silos. The idea we are pushing is that governance is the only way to finally break silos and to harmonize all those projects. Now we've got the energy in the ecosystem, but we need to coordinate as much as we can, and it is an effort. There need to be some investment for this coordination. If we achieve this, we will reduce cost for every organizations, and it will be easier and more secure for people to share their data. So here are some of the bottlenecks, some of the issues we have to cover for personal data sharing. So of course, technical issues like data transfer, governance issues, so charters, governance frameworks, who does what in ecosystems in order to reassure organizations. But we also have technical, legal issues to cover. Companies, organizations, they need to feel protected if personal data circulates. Then we've got consent management, and we won't talk about this here, but business model issues. If the ecosystem is not sustainable, it won't work. And all of this can be put under the governance topic, where you have to make the players play together. When we talk about governance, the thing is, it's kind of blurry because everyone is talking about governance, but it happens at many different levels. It can be at the organization level, but there's also ecosystem, cross-ecosystem, sectoral, cross-sectoral, and cross-jurisdictions, cross-regulation. So here, a few examples. And if we take the mobility sector, but for instance, you can see that right now we are witnessing the building of MaaS projects in many cities all over Europe and all over the world. All of those projects face different issues. They've got to interconnect many stakeholders within the city, for instance, public transport or scooter startups. And it's always the same for every city. So we are redoing the same thing. We are reinventing the wheel for each city. And if we could talk more, it's happening in the Living Lab Paul was talking about. But if we could talk at a larger scale, it would save a lot of effort for each company. And we also have an issue is that many of the mobility services come from big tech or big private players. And there is a question of balance of powers here. If cities talk one by one to Uber, for instance, then Uber can do or not do what cities want. If we can come up at some point with an aligned city front, then we are stronger. So here are some of the sectoral initiatives pushing toward this goal. So open and agile smart cities, police, Eurocities, and MaaS Alliance with Piia here. And we believe that this is the only way to achieve true interoperability at the sectoral level, is to have federations taking care of this specific topic. Here is a specific example of why it's important to think at the cross-sectoral level. In fact, we are used to think for data at a sectoral level. For instance, finance, skills, health, mobility. You're all used to talk to your neighbors, the actors, the players next to you. But when you're talking about personal data sharing, you easily can see many, many use cases involving two different sectors. So here I put an example between a MaaS for WIM for Helsinki. Imagine in your MaaS, you've got all your mobility habits, and imagine that you can share it in one click with a job platform. And then you could see all the jobs that are proposed to you with indications of how long it will take for you to get there and the cost of it. And it would help you to decide of the better job offer. Here is an example, but you could have many links with between mobility and administration, finance, health, and so on. And if we want this to happen, if we want those cross-sectoral use cases to happen, at some point we've got to build a common infrastructure, cross-sectoral, and the common governance frameworks at a cross-sectoral level. Then we've got the cross-border problem. So here it's great illustration here with mobility and with the Living Lab. You got some regions in Europe very with many countries next to each other, and people commuting every day from one country to another. For instance, Maastricht and Liège, and you don't want those people to have to live and work with twice the number of information systems and mobility platforms. So if I live in Maastricht and work in Liège, I want to be able to be recognized by my MaaS providers in both cities without opening new accounts. So this is also why we need more governance, more cooperation. And finally, at the top level, cross-jurisdiction level, we got GDPR and, for instance, CCPA. That's an example, but we're already talking with institutions like WTO about how we would manage cross-sectoral personal data sharing. So this is why, as Paul said, this is why we built the association A New Governance that started from MyData. So the idea is to bring together many ecosystems in different sectors, health, mobility, skills, and so on, to work on the creation of a public-private people partnership for personal data sharing. And the deliverable of A New Governance is governance frameworks. As Paul said, we already started to work at the Flemish level with the Flemish ecosystem on governance frameworks. We do this at a local place for mobility, but the idea within A New Governance is to share information, to exchange with other mobility projects and with other projects from other sectors. Within A New Governance, so we rely on a human-centric principle of MyData, and we add one more principle that we call the separation of powers principle. So, which means that to us, the MyData operators should only deal with and permissions for data transfer, but they should not hold data. They should not be personal data stores. It's a complementary approach because you can have a consent management system and many personal data stores. It's totally complementary. Here's an example with OneCube, so my startup, of how it would work. Imagine you have your first application. You want to transfer your data to a second application. In the middle, your personal data operator will take your consents as a third party, as an independent third party. And then you have to be authenticated on your two different services. The operator will make the link between the two authentications. And later on, if you want to, but it's not mandatory, you can have access of a consent dashboard with all the consents you gave all over the web. The thing is, in this consent dashboard, you only see consents but you do not see that data, transferred data. This is the separation of powers principle. And so within a new governance, we are working at the common layer. The thing is, it's not about only personal data operators. We are building together all the personal data operators. We are building a common human permission layer with many components that will be used for this competitive landscape of MyData operators. And for instance, I won't go into details, but for instance, the main parts of this human permission layer would be the consent ledger. We are already thinking about blockchain technologies, but it's not mandatory to have this. Standards would be enough. But the thing is, we need to have MyData operators. We need them to be interoperable and substitutable. You can, they represent individuals, but individuals, they can change anytime from MyData operators. And to achieve this human permission layer, so we need to have a governance on top of it that would be cross-sectoral, and that would be top-down and bottom-up. Top-down is we take, of course, we take regulation like GDPR to build the infrastructure. We apply this infrastructure on different sectors, different projects. And then we wrap it up and we give feedback to the regulator and to the legislator. We already started this process this year. The big difficulty is that we have to align a lot with other work in the whole European data strategy, like non-personal data sharing, because the two, we are talking about mixed data here for many use cases. The two are highly related. So what we are in charge of with a new governance is working on those governance frameworks at the cross-sectoral personal data space level. And personally, I am in charge of the mobility sector, and I make the liaison with other groups in other sectors. So thanks for your attention, and do not hesitate to contact us if we can share knowledge, good practices on governance frameworks if you work in mobility, in order to build, it's not only European, but a global front for mobility personal data sharing standards. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Olivier. It is a very good speech, and I think that the need for governance is very important in all of our projects. Could you turn off your mic?
Paul, your mic is off.
Okay, I muted myself, apparently. Thank you, Gabriel, for notifying me. I will do the next presentation for rounding up the presentations around mobility. I think we have already seen a lot of very interesting content, and let me share my presentation. It will not be very long because we're running late on the schedule, and this means that we'll probably not be able to do the co-creation session that we planned on our program, but anyway, we will host another event to do the co-creation afterwards. So on the slides, I don't know if everyone can see my slides being presented.
Yes, Paul, but...
Yes.
Okay. So as a small introduction, my name is Paul Theyskens. I currently work as an ecosystem consultant for the Department of Mobility Flanders. And next to that, as a volunteer, I've been working on MyData for the last 6-7 years, and I'm a co-founder of the MyData Brussels Hub. And so, first of all, some news from the market, as already being mentioned by some of our colleagues recently. In Belgium, we see a lot of public and private partners coming together and develop some public-private partnerships to develop the MyMobility Profile ID. And also digital twins on solid, but also on interoperable MyData operator services that combine solid with other data stores that already houses data of the individual citizens in Belgium. You know that in Belgium there is already a big bank, KBC, who has a MyData operator called Mico, who is also part of the ecosystem. And so we see that interoperability becomes a topic towards the future. We see also the Living Lab Benelux, of which Olivier already announced. We have a collaboration between the different countries, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, the part North Rhine-Westphalen, Aachen and Köln in North Rhine-Westphalen, and also Luxembourg to help evolve the personal mobility data sharing that is already happening in the Dutch MaaS pilots, the Dutch Mobility as a Service pilots that have been implemented, with standards in mobility like the TOMP API, which is a standard development in Holland. And we see that this is already based on the Fraunhofer industrial data spaces architecture that is the basis of the EU mobility data space that is now being part of the strategy of Europe, and that it also contains already the data sharing in practice between someone traveling from Hasselt in Belgium to Maastricht to Aachen and then renting a bike in Aachen, and all of that data being shared already between the operators and the different governments on a regional scale. So that is very promising. And so the first candidate there in the lab that we're now looking at is something for mobility impaired people. As Olivier also said, and also Pieter and Raf said, we need to make services so that the mobility impaired person doesn't have to connect to 10 different services in these countries. And we have to build a semantic profile of the user to enable him to travel himself. The second candidate pilot is what we call a third-party payment rule. And a third-party payment rule, which is already developed in open source by University Ghent, which is now the basis for development of automation of this administration that you now have to deal with, because everybody has to connect to all of the different mobility services today. We also have to take care of the administration of consuming that data with these providers and Uber and all of the others. And so what have we done in Belgium is we have looked at the MyMobility Profile, which is exactly what Gabriel is also doing in France. Gabriel is already a lot advanced on that. We are currently in the process with people from different sectors to set up the pilots, and we're inviting consortium partners to look at MyMobility Profile, getting data from Google. Google is now the owner of the customer in public transport, where they 85% of the users use Google Maps. 85% up to 70% of the users in their app on navigation in their car use Waze. So that is, I think, an important data set. But we're also looking at using a phone tracker to get your data with consent of the user, of course. And that is already happening in Holland, where today in a MaaS context, mobility as a service context, there are already 10,000 people sharing all of their data with authorities. And in this way, we want to build up a MyMobility Profile and also a MyData consent service, a permission service in which you know what's going on, you know what's being shared. And so one of the first use cases there is that we can come to a mobility budget manager for the citizen, a mobility budget manager that will allow us to manage our data. Mobility is up to 20% of our annual family budget. And if we can just get all that data, as Raf from the government said, and we can put a digital twin on top of that, then we can have suggestions on where to travel. And we see also, for instance, for ourselves or our family, the modal split between train, bus, and car. So we can optimize that. And we can also, based on our budget on a yearly basis, give that data to third parties, to our employer to manage his fleet of his company cars better, to be able to really have an active management of our budget and also an active management of our CO2 footprint, so that we can do impact accounting on a societal basis. And that's, I think, a very important evolution that we see. Things like what has also been explained by Raf, we can set up services, and there we are looking at in the same way that Gabriel is looking at this in France. We're looking at setting up a commons data service, a commons that will be the independent party, a neutral party that will manage that data of our mobility for us. And because today we see in MyData that still 80% to 90% sometimes of the people that we interview have no clue on how to do it themselves, and no intention to go and manage their own data if there's no real benefit because of it. And there we see an opportunity for setting up commons. The next thing is that for the car sharing industry, the carsharing.be, Autodelen, is an organization of car sharing providers. They have set up a project called My Mobility Profile for car sharing. And so there, the tracker of your mobility will also lead to recommendations for more sustainable car sharing, especially aimed at citizens, families with 2 cars, to be able to, from your budget and your history, to recommend you to take up car sharing in subscription, or car sharing in a co-owned car sharing services as one side of the model. And then the other model is about shared services, not having to copy your license every time you go and rent a car, for instance. Also using this digital twin to make sure that you create better administration services, and therefore also get the car sharing providers more business. And that's, I think, a very interesting thing to watch, where the industry is taking the initiative to do that. And then finally, on the government context, we see today that we still have traditional traffic problems. This is a typical view of in going from the city of Ghent to Antwerp. There's a traffic jam towards Antwerp, which was a little less over the last few months, of course, due to COVID, but still we see that traffic jam increasing again over the last few weeks. And there, a solution of integrated traffic management could be offered to people connecting their data, of offering a free incentive to take the alternative tunnel, which now costs €6 in the city, and then offering, because of a certain volume of traffic, offering it to reduce the traffic jam. And so in Ghent, city of Ghent, there is an open traffic management as a service platform that connects all of the data in an open city context. And that is, I think, also the future, to connect the city to the mobility providers. And there we are looking at the enormous potential of personal data. So as a wrap up, I think a lot of interesting things to talk about in mobility today, a lot of different initiatives. The common data spaces and the roadmap towards the common data spaces is very important for all of the players in mobility. We see today that we are connecting with the other countries to compare what we're doing and to be ready. The Dutch TOMP API, as said before, is already developed on basis of the Fraunhofer IDSA architecture, which is ready for connection to the European data space idea. So I think also Gaia X is there an important player in the market that will connect the industry to the personal data and the authority for our future. A last thing that I want to mention, and this is what Raf already announced, is that MyData, in the Flemish government program, in the September declaration, it was announced that we're looking at establishing a data utility that would be powered by what we call public-private people partnership, the 4P model that is already being experimented with in Japan and also in some Nordic countries. That is a very interesting evolution that we are looking at in the evolution of the European countries towards the fair data economy and putting the citizen in control of their data. And so from a MyData standpoint, this is of course very active and very enthusiastic that we are about that evolution going on. And so I hope to next year also to bring you an update on what's going on here. But I think that by that time we shall see a number of services that will already be in place. I thank you very much for your attention. And now I would like to give the word to Freya. And Freya is an an academic and an artistic researcher on law and digital technology. And she's interested in AI, in robotics, in human rights, and in privacy. And there, she is currently conducting her PhD research on the legal and ethical aspects of control, optimizing and monetizing big data generated through the use of connected cars and V2X communications. Connected cars, of course, 80% of our mobility data is cars. And this is the next frontier that we're talking about. And of course, the most sexy data in mobility that we can think of. So before joining Bournemouth, Freya worked as a project researcher on European funded projects on privacy and data protection, on the PSI directive, on open access, and on text and data mining. And prior to that, she worked as a trademark and design attorney and as a lecturer on law and ethics. So welcome, Freya, and happy that you are here today with us.
Hi, thanks, Paul. I'll be really brief. I just want to plug in a few interesting things for the discussion later. I have a few slides. Let me see if this is going to work. I think you can see my screen, right?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I tried to use the presenter view previously, and that didn't work. People were just stuck on the first slide, so I think I'm just going to do it like this, if that's okay. As Paul already mentioned, and thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity to share a little bit of my research and also to share some insights with you. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So my research indeed focuses on data from cars. So this is really interesting. If you have a bit of a modern car, it'll be equipped with a lot of sensors and cameras and all of these nifty little things that are collecting a lot of data. So although we don't have self-driving cars on the roads, the normal roads these days yet, our cars are increasingly becoming connected and automated. So the projection is indeed that they will generate a lot of data, and so it's data about the way your windscreen is functioning. Some of the cars even have sensors in the steering wheel or in your seat, so they will know if you are starting to slouch a little bit, or if you are steering really volatile, if you are braking, if you are speeding. So all of this data is then used, of course, to make our cars more safer, more convenient, and more secure. But there are a lot of parties, as we already heard a lot of examples of, a lot of parties are interested in this data. So here's another example of who is interested in this type of data. So we see, of course, the government is really interested in this data in the terms of MaaS and to develop smart cities. There are other players who are interested, of course. Entertainment. It would be really interesting to know that every time you drive home at a certain time, McDonald's is going to be interested if you are crossing the street from them, so they can ping you and give you an advertisement. Of course, for parking opportunities, this data is really interesting. But also, and that's one of my case studies, is car insurance. They are really interested in this data because it turns out that, of course, the speeding, but also data about the way you are braking or you are cornering tells them a lot about the risk that you are posing for getting into an accident. So how then is this data shared? The problem that we are facing at the moment, and there's a discussion at EU level as well, and there's a call for the European Commission to regulate access to in-vehicle data and the systems. Because at the moment, if you buy a car that has these type of sensors, that has cameras in them, that is a bit modern or a smart car, you will have signed a contract with the car manufacturer and allowing them to use this data for, of course, the functioning of your car. So they also say in their contracts that if you do not allow them to use this type of data, then basically you've spent a lot of money on a dumb car, because if it is not connected, if they can't use this data, they cannot provide you with all of these additional nifty services that make the smart car, make the car this more convenient and safe car. So you have basically signed away your control over this type of data. They've been doing that for quite some time already, and it's only recently that people are starting to wonder, and other parties are starting to become more interested, and they want to have access directly to the vehicle to obtain this data. So there are a few things going on at the moment, and a few proposals on how we should govern the data that is generated within the car and who should have the ownership or the control over that. So the vehicle manufacturers say we should have control over this because of security, because of privacy, of course. And so what they propose is all of the data should be sent to our servers, and then we provide it to all of these interested parties. So we've seen a lot of initiatives happening. For example, Autonomo is a platform where third parties can access the data for reuse, but this all boils down to them still having to rely on the car manufacturer to decide what data they make available, under what conditions, and how. So real-time data, obtaining real-time data is still very problematic for a lot of parties, which is limiting the innovations that can take place based on this data. So why I think that this is really interesting, and what I think that the MyData community, and then especially, I'm going to the next slide, the MyData operators, the position or the role that they can fulfill here is indeed, if we talk about who is and who should be in control. So my research basically looked at who is in control legally at the moment, as we know that, or based on the assumption that all of the data from your car is personal data. Unfortunately, there is, well, maybe not unfortunately, but we can discuss that. There is no legal ownership in the sense of property over data, but that doesn't mean that we don't have other regulation that in fact and in practice leads to a certain type of property right over data. Going back to indeed the definition of the qualification of data as personal data. So should you then not, as the driver, as the generator of this data, have a certain control over this data? And here is basically where the MyData operators come in. So the vehicle manufacturers propose this extended vehicle. And then they say there's going to be a neutral platform. We will provide the data to this neutral platform, and then they make it available for reuse. But the whole definition of neutral, as we have seen now also in this new European proposal on the Data Governance Act, is it's not neutral in the term of that there's not a company behind it. And that's, of course, where the MyData operators can come in, because they can really be this neutral party in between the driver and who else wants to access this data. So you will have the control back over what you want to be happening with your data and for what purpose. I also want to really quick, and then I'll definitely allow for the discussion to happen, because I'm really interested in, of course, everybody who's here and what they are working on in their feedback. So I also put this in the chat. So we're working on a little project called the Car Data Portability Project. So as already mentioned, Olivier already mentioned this as well. Under the GDPR, considering that vehicle data is personal data, you have the right to access this data and also the right to data portability. Now, there's a lot of talk about data portability. So if we would strengthen this right, it could, of course, help us a lot in gaining access to mobility, to car data within mobility projects, within MaaS projects. So I really want to invite you to please, if you are interested, to contact me or to go to this form and fill in your email. And I'm going to help you with trying to get the data from your car and to see how this process works, because a lot of people say that this is an opportunity, but I've had some experience with this, and in practice, it doesn't work that well. So it would be really good if we could show that as well and give some recommendations on how this could be improved. So here, the rights to data portability. I thought I should put it here, but I think we're running out of time. So. Okay, so this is me. I wanted to show a little clip, but it's really fun to watch The Fate of the Furious. There's a thing in there on zombie cars. And that, of course, is one of the reasons why car manufacturers say we should not allow just anyone to access the car. That's it for me. Thank you so much, Paul. Again, I'm looking forward to the discussion and the questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Freya.
I think we are just about at the end of our session, and I would like to thank you very much for joining our session today. I think that some top content has been produced by a very interesting number of speakers who come from all sides of the mobility ecosystem, and that things are really happening for mobility and MyData, for mobility and Solid, and putting the control back in the hands of the citizen. And we are looking forward in the next year to see what we will be able to do in an international context between the different countries, and I'm looking forward. I would like to thank all of the people also listening in on our session today, and if there are any questions, of course, we stay at your disposition in Slack on the mobility channel that we will probably now start opening in the Slack channel of the MyData Slack. And so for all of you, good evening, and I hope to see you soon in one of the digital online connections that will come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks, Paul, for organizing this.
Thanks, Paul, for organizing. Well done.
Paul,
are we allowed to stay on a little bit, or are we going to be kicked off?
Paul, you're on mute.
I asked our session host, and he said we could hang out some more, but I see that
maybe some participants are interested to.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any more questions from the crowd, but.
Yeah, I don't see any in the chat though.
I see Rika has a question.
Yeah, well, it's not a question, but just a kind of reminder to Paul and Raf that I would like to meet you in another Zoom session, which I can share the link in the chat. It's also in your email, but we would like to do a quick interview. So if I leave from here, go to the other Zoom and wait for you there. I mean, you don't have to rush. I'll just patiently wait for you there. So see you in a bit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the session is being recorded and will be published as soon as possible, so we can share that on the internet. And I think we had a very good session. Thanks all of you for very top content that you produced, and I'm very happy. I think that we try to show people that things are exciting and happening in MyData, in Solid, and in mobility as well, and that we are looking forward to a very interesting year coming up. I don't know if there's any other remarks from you guys.
Not for me. It's been a good day.
Paul, you're on mute again, I think.
I'm sorry for that. It's a natural thing on Zoom that you, it's an automation now, an automatic thing that you put yourself on mute. Okay, we'll move to the other session, Raf, if that's okay with you. And then hope to see you soon. Thank you all for joining our session.